Hey guys, Matt Goodwin. Welcome back to GB News. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party, was on BBC Question Time December 5th. And I want to show you a few clips from this episode because I think it tells us a lot about British politics. Don't forget, Reform are riding high in the polls. They just came second, ahead of the incumbent Labour Party behind the Tories in one national poll. They've just passed 100,000 party members. Conservatives are defecting to Reform. Now, let me just start with this clip of Nigel Farage telling it straight to Conservative Kevin Hollinrake. Check it out.
How can you as a Conservative Party keep a straight face to this audience, to the nation, having promised in 2010, 2015, 2017, you'd reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. In 2019, substantial reductions and net migrations nearly 1 million.
Well, Nigel Farage there taking the Conservative Party to task for its dismal record on immigration between 2010 and 2024. And you know what? He's absolutely right, because the Conservative Party did lie to the British people when it came to this issue. Don't forget, yes, it was Tony Blair and Labour who started this disastrous experiment with mass immigration all the way back in the mid-2000s, but it was David Cameron and George Osborne in the early 2010s who entrenched mass immigration as a policy, and then it was Boris Johnson after 2019, alongside Priti Patel as his Home Secretary, who put mass immigration on steroids. They opened the doors to mass migration from outside of Europe, so much so that over the last couple of years, as a direct result of that Conservative policy, 86% of all immigration into Britain today is coming from outside of Europe. And much of it is low-skill, low-wage immigration that's undermining the prosperity of our great nation. It's undermining our economic growth, our productivity. And that too did not go unnoticed by Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party, who didn't only point out the Conservative Party's dismal record on this issue, but how they've changed the kind of immigration into Britain. I want you to listen to this and listen to it carefully. Check it out.
And the worst part of it, Ben asked about, the impact on communities, the impact on services. The worst part of it
He also talked about welcoming diversity.
Well, we'll talk about diversity in a second. The problem with welcoming diversity is if you do it in too big a level, you get division. And we're seeing that in many of our towns. The last 2 million that came from outside the EU under your watch, only 16% of them are working. Only 16% of that 2 million are working, which means they're dependents, which means they're using schools, the health service, all of these things. And we now know the truth, that selective immigration can be very good for diversity, very good for the economy, very good for all of those things. And you could argue that for decades, up until the early 2000s, it was working really well. But now, not only is it a catastrophe for people's way of life, not only does it deny them access to services, mass immigration is making Britain poorer. And the fact that Keir Starmer today doesn't seem to think it's a priority shows you that with these two parties, it is only going to get worse.
Nigel, you be honest with people.
We need a complete. We need to leave the ECHR so we can deport people that come illegally and take back control of our borders and our lives.
You be honest with people.
And that's what the public wants.
Now, Nigel Farage there making the crucial point that it isn't only that the two big parties, Labour and the Tories, or the Uniparty, have opened the floodgates to mass, uncontrolled, unprecedented immigration. He's also making the critical point that they've changed the type of immigration into Britain. Because what they've done is they've done the opposite of what they promised you, the British people, after the Brexit referendum. You might remember, whether you're on the left or the right, you might remember political leaders saying, well, if we left the European Union, we'd get high-skill, selective, controlled immigration that would drive prosperity in our country. But actually, they gave us the very opposite of those things. Both politicians on the left and the right, Conservative and Labour politicians, have given us low-skill, low-wage, uncontrolled, non-selective immigration, which is more economically costly than it is contributing to the collective pot. In fact, even the Office for Budget Responsibility has concluded that every low-wage, low-skill migrant entering Britain is costing you, the British taxpayer, somewhere between £150,000 and £1 million. Why? Because as Nigel Farage said on Question Time, only about 16% of the people who are coming into Britain, and this is utterly bonkers, are coming in on high-skilled worker visas. Who are the rest? Well, they're relatives of workers. They're the dependents of workers. They're international students, or even the relatives of students. Or they're refugees, asylum seekers and illegal migrants, all of whom often end up working in low-wage, low-skilled jobs, earning lower than average wages, which is dragging down the economy and making it much more difficult for us to build that prosperous, cohesive, productive society and economy that we all want to live in. And as Farage pointed out, what's even more remarkable than that is the complete disinterest that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have in even talking about this issue. They're not even fundamentally revising this broken immigration policy. In fact, when Keir Starmer reset his government, he didn't even mention mass immigration as a priority. Clearly, because many Labour politicians do not view mass immigration as a priority at all. And what Farage also said there was he supports leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. And I think we need to be clear as to why he's saying that. Because fundamentally, with more than 140,000 illegal migrants entering Britain on the small boats, with more than 11,000 foreign national offenders in our prisons, with around 1 million illegal migrants, according to the Pew Research Centre, living and most likely working in Britain, we can't remove any of these people and we cannot regain control of our borders so long as we're in the European Convention on Human Rights. It's not difficult to solve the small boats crisis. It means leaving the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. It means reforming legislation like the Human Rights Act, and it means having an active deterrent. And the reason Farage is mentioning it is because this is going to become, mark my words, a critical dividing line at the next general election between reform and the established parties or the Uni Party. Now, the other remarkable clip that I want to show you from this question time was what Alastair Campbell, the Labour advisor, had to say, because it's quite clear that while some people are analysing and debating the big topics of the day like mass immigration, some other people are still stuck all the way back in 2016. Check this out.
I was disappointed Keir didn't mention Brexit, because I think Brexit has done so much damage to this country. Well, I'm sorry, Nigel. I'm sorry. Nigel doesn't want to accept.
You are the worst loser in history, Alastair. No. Get over it. It's 8 years ago. Move on.
No, you won.
It's done.
You're the worst winner.
It's done.
Because you've never taken responsibility for what you've won.
It's done. No, we're independent. We're free, and we're not part of that eurozone that's collapsing around its ears.
I'll tell you what
Rejoice.
You are,
we're out.
I'll tell you what you
we're
are.
free.
Well, dear, oh dear, Alastair Campbell there reflecting much of the elite class in this country by being unable to see beyond Brexit. Everything coming back to that Brexit derangement syndrome that we've become used to when looking at the elite class for much of the last 10 years. And I don't know about you, but Alastair Campbell, to me, just looked completely old-fashioned. He looked like he's not moving with the times and talking about the new issues of the day, like how things such as mass immigration are changing our economy. And, you know, Nigel Farage there made a really important point. He said, well, look at the Eurozone today. Look at the EU today. It's not exactly that politically and economically stable and prosperous oasis that Remainers were talking about nearly a decade ago. Look at France, divided politically, on the cusp of a fresh sovereign debt crisis. Look at North and South, divided economically. Look at East and West, divided culturally. And look at the European Union, recently bogged down in a massive corruption scandal and still nowhere near as democratic as our institutions here in Britain. And why do I say that? Because remember, there is no meaningful competition for executive office in the European Union. That's why it's got that big democratic deficit at its heart. It's not a proper democracy like we're a proper democracy, and don't you ever forget it. And these are all reasons why millions of voters across the continent, including here in Britain, are fundamentally frustrated and fed up with the established political class. And there was one guy in the Question Time audience who I wanted to share with you. I want to put this clip in front of you because I think he, according to the opinion polls, is now speaking for 1 in 4 Brits. Check this out.
I feel that we've had Tory governments, we've had Labour governments in my lifetime. They've all lost control. I feel like there's only one party that's going to control immigration in this country, and that's Reform.
Now, what that guy was saying, which I think is important, is that actually the established left and right in Britain and many other Western democracies today has simply become indistinguishable. They're the same. They are committed to the same broken consensus in the corridors of power. Mass immigration, a big state, big regulation, big tax, big debt, big on woke, big on everything and anything except the British people. And millions of people out there, the forgotten majority, outside of London and Oxford and Cambridge, are utterly fed up with a politics that isn't representing their values and certainly isn't giving them a voice in the national debate. They might not agree with everything that Nigel Farage says. They might not agree with everything that the Reform Party says. But what's clear, looking at the polling and looking at the public mood as we enter 2025, millions of people are looking for something other than Labour and the Tories. And I think that mood, that anti-establishment mood, is only going to grow and grow. What's at the heart of it? It's those concerns over immigration and security. Yes, of course the economy matters. The cost of living crisis matters. The level of taxation matters. The level of regulation matters. But fundamentally, I think what this revolt is about millions of people looking at the borders, looking at the levels of immigration, looking at the decisions that their so-called leaders in Westminster are making, and they're just asking themselves a very simple but a very fundamental question. What about us? What about the British people? What about the hard-working, tax-paying, patriotic British people? And I think one person who really captured this sentiment was also at Question Time. Check this out.
Well, I agree entirely that it probably is only reform, because it's the amount that are coming over on these boats. They're young men. They're not working. Let's go forward 5, 10 years. Where will they be then? Still in this country, not working? And we, and I'm a pensioner, we are paying for these people day in and day out for their accommodation. Where are they going in 5, 10, 20 years' time?
So can I ask you, do you think there are any grounds on which people should be able to come here and claim asylum?
The only grounds that I think that people should be allowed to come into the country is if they had the sufficient qualifications to do the jobs that we probably need.
And as far as asylum goes?
I don't believe in any asylum. I really don't. I think we have taken more than our fair share in this country. I feel very sorry for the little towns, little villages that these people have been put, where people have lived all their lives and they're frightened.
And you know, it's easy for people in the BBC, the elite class, to laugh and mock and insult ordinary men and women like that. But actually, she's speaking for a large majority of people in this country who want the borders to be controlled, who don't want their towns and their villages to be overwhelmed by rapid immigration from outside of Europe. And she's simply conveying this fundamental point that I think runs through much of British society today, which is that people simply want to feel secure and safe in the country that they call home. That's not too much to ask. Labour and the Conservatives might laugh at people like that. They might call them bigots or garbage or cranks or racists. But most people in Britain do fundamentally agree with that perspective, that they are hard-working, tax-paying people who deserve to be treated with respect and decency by the very people they elect to represent them in the institutions and the corridors of power. We need to control our borders, we need to lower immigration, and we need to start putting British people first. Thanks for listening. Matt Goodwin here on GB News. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.